Well, it's a tremendous pleasure to welcome you all to the forum, to the third Nancy Knowlton and Jeremy Jackson Distinguished Lecture in Marine Biodiversity and Conservation. Now, let's see if I can make this work. And this series is provided or made possible through the generosity of the founders of the Center of Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, Nancy and Jeremy, and here they are. I'd like to thank them. And of course, I would like to thank our speaker, Jim, wherever you are back there, for being here. Now, before I introduce Jim Toomey, I am going to tell those of you who may not be so familiar with CMBC just a little about us and what we've been up to this year. So the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation is a virtual center dedicated to the vision that a healthy ocean that sustainably feeds, employs, and maintains humans and all of life on Earth. And we do this through programs, and this is not working here, through programs in research, through our education programs, and through communication. And we don't do this alone. We partner with a whole slew of organizations, NOAA, the Environmental Law Institute, different UCSD departments, the Center for Environmental Economics, IRPS, RADI at UCSD, the Center for Humanities, and then a whole slew of organizations around San Diego, Birch Aquarium, Cal IT Squared, the Oceans Foundation, you can see, and many, many more. And we all work together with the goal of basically solving problems in the ocean. Let me just tell you some of the things that we've been up to this year is launching PEER, which is the Program for Interdisciplinary Environmental Research. And we brought in 4 students this year, or last fall, I should say, to this program. And they bring interdisciplinary approaches. They come from backgrounds in law, in literature, in economics, and in ecology. And here you can see some quotes from some of these 4 students who are now working on a PhD, both at UCSD and at Scripps. We have a wonderful MAS program in Marine Biodiversity and Conservation. This is a Master of Advanced Studies. We accept about 20 students a year, and they have an amazing wealth of experiences. They take an interdisciplinary summer class with the PhD students, the PEER students, and they participate in interdisciplinary forum and have basically a year of interdisciplinary experiences at Scripps. And here's the examples. Each student does a capstone project, a short research project. Here are examples of some of last year's, and you can see they touch on problems of habitat, sports diving, or history, really, technology, aquaculture, film, photography, education. The capstones are pretty much all over the place and very interesting. And what happens to the students when they leave here? Well, we have graduated 120 masters through CMBC, MAS students, and 40 PhD students, and they spread themselves around the country and the globe, working in government, academia, with non-governmental organizations and industry, and really are now having a huge influence on conservation and marine policy, both in this country and globally. One of the things that we've started doing every year is teaming up with Ocean Scientists for Informed Policy, a student group, and sending students to the climate negotiations. This past December, they went to COP20 in Lima, where the students manned a booth. You can see it there, hot, sour, and breathless. And that helped inform delegates to the climate negotiations about the importance of the ocean in regulating the planet's climate. And one of the students, Natalia Gala, gave a talk at his side events, but all of the students had some amazing experiences in communication. We have a set of research initiatives. They are highly varied. We work in the areas of marine biodiversity, basically from Antarctica to the deep sea to the Indo-Pacific. And Greg put in a beautiful movie here. Let's see if I can get it to work. There we go. He recently had an expedition to Indonesia, and that's some of the viewing, I think, as he dives. Really beautiful. We have projects on artisanal fisheries. Some of this work is in the Gulf of California, but also elsewhere in the world. We have projects on coral ecology in the Southern Line Islands, on shark conservation closer to home. There are initiatives on climate agreements, ocean acidification, fish contaminants. We have a program, the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, in which we're bringing together different disciplines to discuss environmental management of the deep sea in the face of human activities like fishing, mining, and energy exploitation. We have initiated a new efforts in the area of food security and sustainable seafood, and really, there's lots more. I've just touched on a little bit of what we do. But now I would, oops, where did you go? It's my great pleasure to introduce Jim Toomey, a world-famous cartoonist. And I have to say that when we invited Jim, I think we had no concept that cartoonists would be on the world stage this month. Sadly, it's true. But I think it's also, they are a very important part of communicating with the public, and Jim is a perfect example of that. So let me just tell you a little bit about him. Jim Toomey grew up in Virginia. He was the son and grandson of engineers, and I think he was headed for a career in engineering at Duke University, but at that time I understand he had a hobby drawing political cartoons for the school newspaper. And, as is often the case, his hobby, I think, blossomed into much, much more. And for the past 20 years, Jim has been writing and drawing the daily comic strip Sherman's Lagoon, which is syndicated quite widely in newspapers in North America. You can find it in the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle, Toronto Star, and more. It also appears in 30 foreign languages. So it shows up in French, Portuguese, Spanish, Norwegian, and Swedish. And Sherman's Lagoon combines two of Jim's lifelong passions, art and the sea. So in addition to drawing his comic strip, Jim is very active in marine conservation, and he received the Environmental Hero Award in 2000, which was presented by NOAA on behalf of Vice President Al Gore for using art and humor to conserve and protect our marine heritage. And he won this award again in 2010. His comic characters and his other illustrations appear in many different forms in educational materials that have been published by NOAA, by the United Nations, and by a variety of nonprofit organizations for the purpose of raising awareness about the oceans. So Jim routinely speaks in front of younger audiences. He speaks at aquaria and conferences, and he uses live drawings and humor to convey the importance of protecting our oceans, and I think we'll probably see some of that today. So Jim holds a Master's of Arts from Stanford University, and I understand he recently went back to receive a Master's of Environmental Management from Duke University, and today he's going to talk to us about drawing inspiration from the sea. And let's welcome him.
Thank you, Lacey, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, and thank you for Nancy and Jeremy for endowing this speaker series. I've never been a distinguished lecturer before. I think this is the first time I've been a distinguished anything, so this is going to be quite a burden to carry today. Yeah, let me, that's okay. Let me get all set up. You always have to fight the technology with these things. I'm going to attempt to draw and speak at the same time, which is always a challenge. Let me open the PowerPoint as well. Okay. Okay, I think we have it. So we have kind of a variety of an audience here. So we have, I think, students. We have maybe folks from the community. We have a fair amount of professors and teachers and academics here. So I've got kind of a wide spectrum of knowledge of the ocean here. And what I'd like to talk about, I don't know if you all came to hear the cartoonist side of this or the ocean side of this. I am really equally incompetent in both areas, so I'm going to prove to you that I can draw, first of all. This is my character, my main character, Sherman. He is a great white shark. And so for you marine biologists in the room, you'll notice I do take some liberties. You probably wouldn't confuse this with a technical illustration of a great white shark. There's 3 gills. I don't know how many do they have, 6 or 7? 5, okay. I think I left out a few fins. So I'm giving you the caveat that I'm not a scientist here. I'm a cartoonist. As a matter of fact, one of my recurring nightmares when I'm in the studio, I'll dream that I'm in the studio drawing, and I'll look over to the other side of my studio, and there will be an audience of marine biologists watching me draw. And usually Jeremy and Nancy are in the front row. So thank you Scripps for making a nightmare come true. So what I'd like to do is talk about, I guess in the words of David Byrne, the singer, how did I get here, right? A lot of folks maybe probably don't want to emulate my career, but at least want to avoid it. So you can find out how I ended up being a cartoonist, how I ended up transforming from an engineer to a cartoonist, which strikes a lot of people as being kind of opposites. I'm going to show you how to draw a comic strip. But I'm also going to explain why the ocean was an inspiration to me, and why ocean characters make such great cartoon characters. They're a bit like superheroes. They've got these incredible powers, so to speak, and I'll go into that a little bit. And then I'm going to show you a little bit from an Alvin adventure I had over the summer. So I want to talk about the deep ocean, because I know the center's been doing a lot of work with deep ocean this year, so I figured we'd touch on that a little bit. And then finally, in the last 2 days, I've been hearing a lot about communication, so I kind of rejiggered my talk a little bit to talk about communication, because I think it's something that seems to come up over and over and over with, especially when I talk to scientists, especially scientists that are connected to environmental issues, on how do we get the word out effectively, how do we get people to listen. So I don't have any formal training in communication, as you can see, but I do have a few observations over my 20 years of doing the comic strip and other outreach materials. I do some videos for various folks and things like that. So I'm going to share with you some of my insights to why I think what makes effective scientific communication. So let's get started. So when I was maybe 7 or 8, or even younger, I was a boy looking at the ocean here. I'm gonna draw me looking at the ocean here. A couple of my life experiences with what really made me fall in love with the ocean. Gotta watch out for the giant shark jumping out. call cartooning the anti-social media because you can't really talk and draw at the same time. Very difficult. So there I am, looking out over the ocean, and when I got a globe, I remember it distinctly. It was a globe that had these sort of relief mountains in the land part, and the water part was just all smooth and blue. And it occurred to me as I was looking at the globe, and it's mostly ocean, that if I had a boat, I could go anywhere. It was, that was my original concept or my first observation about the blue in the globe. And then I had another experience a couple of years later. My dad was a military pilot, and then he retired. And he went into being an engineer, like we heard in the introduction. But we did some flying, and we would rent a plane, and he would continue flying. We continued flying the family around various places, and we went to the Bahamas. I grew up near Washington, D.C., so we flew down to Florida, and then we flew across to the Bahamas. And it was that trip, rather than looking at the ocean that way, where all you see is this sort of blue-gray veneer, what I saw from very low altitude was this beautiful landscape. And that's what really changed my perception of the ocean. So if we get rid of this, what I saw were hills and valleys and coral reefs and gardens and animals. I saw an enormous number of animals. I saw sharks, I saw manta rays, and all this texture and this world down there. There's another very inaccurate shark. Sorry, guys. So that was the ocean I saw from this airplane, and this is the ocean we typically see when we look at it. So it was something that I really became fascinated with the ocean at a young age. And so I went on to really become, I guess, carry on the family tradition. So what I did was I kept drawing, and here's one of my early childhood drawings. Let me try to play this slideshow here. One of my early childhood drawings. So you would think, okay, so somebody who was so fascinated with the ocean, they would maybe major in marine biology in college. But I was up against a family tradition, two traditions actually. All the first males in my family were named John, and they all became mechanical engineers. So I got swept up into that tradition. So there's my dad, John, hang on. My grandfather, who was a mechanical engineer. Great-grandfather, John Toomey. He worked on the Brooklyn Bridge, John Toomey. John. So I got swept up into that, but I was different. I was not John. I was destined to become the family black sheep. I was Jim. So I actually became an engineer, but in the back of my head, I always wanted to be a cartoonist, and I wanted to have something to do with the ocean. So as an engineer, I did a lot of doodling at my desk. I drew a lot, and over the course of time, a couple things happened. First thing is I got fired. But I got pretty good at drawing too. So that double getting fired and being good at drawing helped me sort of launch into the cartooning career. Now, I don't recommend that path to all of you, but I decided to sort of jump whole hog into this when I was about in my late 20s. And there was a second life experience that really made me sort of want to take on a shark as a main character and sea creatures in general. And I carried on another family tradition, which was I became a pilot, an aircraft pilot. And it was an experience I had as a student pilot that made me really appreciate the intelligence of animals. And I'll try to quickly explain what happened. So as a student pilot, you practice stall recovery. So an aerodynamic stall is when the air over the wings slows down to the point where the plane just falls from the sky. And you practice that a lot as a student. But what you don't practice is spin recoveries, which is when if you turn very steeply and very slowly, on a 30-foot wingspan, actually the inside wing can go slower than the outside wing. So what happens is it's an asymmetric stall where one wing stalls and one wing doesn't. So you go into the spin. And they don't teach that to students because they ended up killing more students teaching the stall than they saved by having students know about the spin. But I was just obsessed with this. I had to learn how to do a spin recovery. So the instructor said, I'm not going to go with you, but if you want, you go up really high, like 6,000 feet, and then you pretend that the runway's at 5,000 feet, and then you do this imaginary pattern. And if you get it steep enough, slow enough, you're going to spin out. And then the way you recover is that you have to step on the rudder in the opposite direction of the spin, and then you straighten out, and hopefully the wings don't fall off. So I did this, and I was so traumatized by this that I had the plane reserved for about a 4-hour block, and I did this in the first half hour. And usually usually you have a landscape that's flat and there's a perspective to it. When you actually spin out, you're just looking at it straight down. And I had never seen that before, and it was such a traumatizing thing for me that I just basically wanted to land the plane, kiss the ground, and find the closest bar. But a funny thing happened on the way to the bar, which is that there was a picnic table by the runway, and there were some trees there. And there were some breadcrumbs on the ground, and there was a branch full of sparrows just flying around. And I just stood there, or I sat on the bench, and I watched these sparrows kind of dive down, stall recovery, pick up a little piece of bread, fly back up to the branch, and there was about 10 of them doing that. And I just thought, wow, great stall recovery, great landing, good flare. It's like, I'm being humiliated by sparrows. They're just really good at this. And then it occurred to me, that's intelligence. That's I know it's not maybe what we routinely want to refer to as intelligence, as in what we think of as intelligence, but there's a component of intelligence there that's. And then it occurred to me, it's all over nature. This form of intelligence. Like my son, when he asked, when do trees know when it's fall? It's like, well, when do trees know when it's fall? It's like, Siri, when does trees know when it's fall? I don't know the answer to that. Let's ask Uncle Siri. Or sharks. The intelligence in these animals and other sea creatures, what I really refer to as intelligence, is remarkable, and it's what inspired me to start the comic strip, because they are, in my mind, they're like superheroes. Let me draw a few. So there's Sherman. who is a great white shark, and he is like a lot of people. He's talented without motivation, so he can smell a drop of blood in a mile away. He has that talent, but he's too lazy to actually swim the mile to go find the source of the blood. So there's a little bit of a metaphor there, I guess. But there's a talent, a superpower that a shark has that kind of maps a little bit closely with human characters. So that's part of why I love to draw sea creatures and put them in the comic strip. They make fantastic characters. So do another one. So his sidekick, Sherman's sidekick, is a green sea turtle named Fillmore. By the way, I named all these characters. I was living in San Francisco, and when I was looking for names, I just got out a map of San Francisco and named them after streets, more or less. So there's Fillmore Street. There's actually Sherman Street. There's Broderick, there's Hawthorne, so they're all just basically. So there's the first creative lesson for you, which is when you're stuck, just blaze your eyes off it. So there's Fillmore. He's a green sea turtle. Now, he's got superpowers, right? He has this incredible ability to navigate, right? I'm sure I'm talking to a lot of marine biologists here who probably know this really deeply. And we had a conversation about sharks yesterday. Leopard sharks apparently have a way to navigate in these waters that is still keeping scientists very busy trying to figure out. Now, green sea turtles will navigate, say, the ones in the southern Atlantic. They'll find their way from the coast of Brazil to Ascension Island, which is about 1,500 miles off the coast of Brazil. It's about, I think, 2,000 miles from the African coast. And Ascension Island is about 35 square miles. It's maybe a 6x6 patch in the middle of that ocean. And these turtles just do that routinely. So for me, that's kind of a superhero, a superpower that I like to take advantage of. So I send Fillmore to Ascension Island every spring looking for a mate. He has wonderful navigation skills, and unfortunately he has terrible pickup lines, so he always seems to strike out. But he's another example of a character that where I'm really taking advantage of the unique properties of marine animals to create a comic strip character with texture. So, I was going to try to draw a comic strip now. This could take a while. Let me see, just to show you the mystery of the process here. Basically, the first thing you do is you think of the text, the dialogue, and then you put the dialogue in, and then you draw around the dialogue. The dialogue is really the inflexible part, because once you've distilled the gag down to the basic minimum amount of words, then the drawing part can kind of fit in between. So let me give you an example of, I guess a typical day's work for me, if you call it work. So what I'm imagining here is a conversation between Sherman and Fillmore, his sidekick, which is the turtle. Let me put this down here to see if it'll. Yep. Isn't it wonderful how humans devote an entire day to the oceans? I wouldn't read too much into it. Too bad they don't want spell check and Photoshop it. They devote an entire day to groundhogs. Okay. So, now I have the dialogue. And the rest is kind of fun. We got another. So typically I'll have filmware, reading book somewhere. Sherman's coming inside. So it's a little bit like filmmaking. If there are filmmakers out there, the first frame is usually like an establishing shot, is what we call in filmmaking, but it's just sort of who are the characters and where are they? And then you can go to a close-up. Actually, there's not what we're talking about. Then sometimes I go way back to show. I love to draw coral. Coral is a big part of my strip as well. The undersea world is so different from the terrestrial world that all these different wonderful shapes and colors. In the Sunday pages, I can actually do color. And it's almost like a Dr. Seuss world of different crazy animals and plants and shapes. So we'll go back to this medium shot. So that's my day's work. For about 15 minutes on the golf course. For me, the hard part's the writing. But if you're a writer, it helps to stick some kind of stake in the ground and work from it. So that's your point of stability. And oftentimes I will read ocean stories. There's a lot of ocean stories, especially lately. There were 2 or 3 just in the New York Times today. One about how we're killing off the oceans at an incredible rate. Another one on ocean acidification. Some of that stuff I love to work with, despite the fact that it might have bring negative connotations to the readers. It's kind of I guess a dark humor that I enjoy. So I'll show you some examples of how I've sort of woven in some current events, some current ocean topics into a few strips. I don't want to turn this into a comic strip reading session, because you can always do that in your spare time. Just buy lots of my books and go ahead. Oops, let me... Okay. So about 4 years ago was the Gulf disaster. I just pulled a couple of frames here, but I did a series on that where I brought the characters to the Gulf of Mexico and really kind of hung around the wellhead and assessed the dangers there. And, so that was a lot of fun. In the beginning, I didn't think cartoonists work about 6 weeks ahead of time, and I thought, well, I don't have enough time to do this, because by the time I do the series on it, it's going to be over. And then 6 weeks into it, the Anderson Cooper's saying it's going to be at least another 10 weeks. And then, it was bad news for the ocean and for everybody else, but it was good news for me. I could actually do a series of cartoons on it, which I did. I think this appeared in July. It happened in April, so it lasted that long. Very sad. I saw an isopod in the formaldehyde jar. There's some of us who were at a lunch where they had this on display. And I love putting crazy characters into a cartoon. So, and there's just no shortage of them. Every time I want a guest character, heck, I just Google crazy ocean stuff, and boom, I get isopod. I didn't even know they existed, isopods, and they're like a giant roly-poly bug underwater. So I thought, wow, let's do isopods. Now, I did take some license with the isopod. Now, there's talk about how life in the deep sea, especially things like tube worms, could actually be similar to life on another planet, because of the conditions they put up with. So I actually took these isopods to another planet. They ended up being aliens in this series. They pulled out a laser gun, hijacked the spaceship, and they got in the spaceship and they flew off to the moon of Jupiter, Europa, I guess, where I think isopods came from. Is that true? No? Okay, anyway. Ocean acidification, I did a series on that just recently, about a month or 2 ago. And I was fascinated with the fact that OA apparently will affect the senses of sharks. Their ability to smell. We had this discussion yesterday over lunch how I guess there's some bone in there, or some kind of tissue in there that gets dissolved because of this higher acidity. So I thought, well, that's a real esoteric little thing that how can I possibly get that into a comic strip? And there I did it. I don't know how funny it is, and I don't know how many people got it, but I just felt like I wanted to put some acidification humor into people's lives. So I don't want to throw a lot of cartoons out there because, like I said, you could always read them in your spare time. What I'd like to do is talk about show you some vacation photos, as a matter of fact. So Disney World is in the middle of Florida. I was on Google Earth today, and I probably can't get it on here, but if you Google Earth Disney World and you go down and you hit Disney World, and then you go about 250 miles west. That's actually where I went, to a place called the Florida Escarpment. I was lucky enough to be invited by Duke University Marine Lab to be the cartoonist in residence, whatever that is, on Alvin. So we went out, we started at Gulfport, and we went southeast to the Florida Escarpment. And it was an incredible inspiration for me. One of my deliverables for it will be cartoons and a short film. But I wanted to show you some video that was taken on my particular Alvin trip, because it's just, for me, it's incredible as an artist to evolve from that little boy in the airplane looking at the bottom of the Bahamas to being in Alvin and looking at something 2 miles down and seeing so much life down there. Saw chimera, we saw octopuses, we saw tube worms, which I'll talk about in a little while. So let me show you a little bit of video. This is me climbing in. Goodbye for the world. That's us launching. So we started our descent, and it took about 3 hours to go 2 miles, 3,300 meters. We were going fairly slow. And the Florida Escarpment is, it's a landscape like the Grand Canyon. It's comparable in scale to it. Well, it's maybe about a third the size of the Grand Canyon in terms of sheer cliffs. But it's funny to imagine all these people in Disneyland with their Mickey Mouse hats looking at this little Matterhorn and being so impressed. And just a couple hundred miles away is an underwater Grand Canyon. The kind of topography that is underwater is just mind-boggling, and nobody knows about it because it's just all this flat blue on the map. As most of you in the room know, the longest mountain range, the mid-ocean range, is underwater. The Mariana Trench, there's just so many topographical details underwater that you can't take a sweeping photograph of. You can't show it in a book, but the fact that nobody knows it exists is really a crime, that we don't teach it in school. So this is, what we did was we landed about 200 meters west of the cliff, and when we landed it was just a perfectly flat sandy plain, and I was thinking, gosh, we're not going to see a thing down here. This is like an underwater desert. But about a minute into the trip, and I'm going to need some help because I have not identified this animal. Maybe some of you know what this is. This giant pink squid was a minute into our trip, and I just said to myself, I'm not in Kansas anymore, that's for sure. This thing. It looked like it was about, I guess the body was about 3 feet long, and the actual tentacles were about 10 feet long. Does anybody know what this is?
There's publications on it by a guy named Vecchione.
Yeah.
So we can get it to you.
Okay. Look how long the tentacles are. I mean, this thing is, and it was just hovering there. So we drove right by it. Talk about the Star Wars bar scene. I mean, this thing is, it's like, holy smokes. And as I said, there's we saw chimera. this is probably the first time this fish has seen its surroundings or anything. I don't know. Maybe its eyes are so sensitive it can actually make out a lot of details in that pitch black water. This is an anglerfish. When you Google anglerfish, you get a bunch of dead anglerfish, right? You think the classic picture is this sort of blackish brown thing with these monstrous teeth. And I had no idea that there was just so much texture and frankly, life in these things. It was not showing us the classic light. I did notice it had turn signals and brake lights, though. So those two lights that you see are actually shining beyond the fish, but that is I believe it's a 1 meter increment, so that they can measure things, obviously. And that fish is probably 1.5 foot maybe. And this is us approaching the cliff. So if you can imagine just the anticipation, we drove about a half hour along this sandy plain. So that's us. I'll mute it. There was a little bit of cursing going on in there, so. But then just out of the darkness came the Grand Canyon. And it went up and up and up, straight up. Just this granite face. The thing that really fascinated me, they were taking a lot of samples of these tube worms. We drove by a few tube worm forests. And I think that's what really changed me. I travel a lot. We all probably love to travel, and because travel changes our perspective on the planet, the people on the planet. And I do a lot of rough travel. I'll go to Africa or India or whatever, and I'll come back very changed. But it's always coming back changed about the way I see people. Almost always. Sometimes terrestrial nature, but this is the first time I've come back changed about how I've seen the planet, our own origins. The tube worms we saw down there, the hanging out with the scientists for 7 or 8 days, learning about the origin of, learning about chemosynthesis, how, this was, I guess, proven maybe 100 years ago, but it was discovered in the field with Alvin in the Galapagos Rift less than 40 years ago. This notion that you don't need the sun to synthesize organic molecules. You can actually have this isolated community in this cold seep, in this occasion it was a cold seep, that can take the energy of that cold seep and synthesize organic molecules. It's mind-boggling. And it was something that the scientists on the boat were really, really fascinated with, obviously. The story I heard, and you've probably all heard the story a few times, I'll tell my version of it, but when Alvin was on the Galapagos Rift in '77, it was ostensibly on an oceanography expedition. It was looking at more topography than not expecting any life. So the Woods Hole folks that were on that particular dive were really looking at landforms, bottom forms. And they saw all this, and then they went back and they talked to the biology people there, and they said, "Hey, cool landforms, but you didn't tell us about all that life down there." And they said, "What life?" They said, "Yeah, well, there's tube worms and there's fish feeding off them, and there's mussels and this and that." And it's like, really? So there's this whole community eating what? How does this come from? So they actually, drilled into it and came up with the chemosynthesis theory, and that's about as much as I know. I'm getting into dangerous territory here with not knowing the actual marine biology of it. But I guess what fascinated me was that we have explored maybe 1 or 2% thoroughly of the ocean. So if you take a typical Alvin dive, and let me simulate it. Let's see here. So this is Alvin, right? And we'll scale 30-foot Alvin down to this 5-inch foam. The Gulf of Mexico is probably Greater San Diego. And what we did with Alvin was we went straight down and we looked at that. And then we went straight back up. We looked at that. By the way, did anybody lose an earring? And when we did that, we saw tube worms. We saw chemosynthesis. We saw, say that 10 times fast. We saw, when the guys at NASA, and they were all guys back then, they had this Goldilocks theory about extraterrestrial life, right? They up until that point, they go out and look at the night sky, and they'd see an astronomical amount of stars. How many stars out there? Astronomical, that's where the word comes from, right? And then they said, well, what are the chances of life out there? And they said, well, there's this Goldilocks theory where the ideal distance from a star will produce an Earth. And the chances of that are astronomically small. So the chances of life is maybe astronomical divided by astronomical. So what's that? Well, 0 or 1. There's at least 1. So, or 0. I don't know, do we have any mathematicians in the room? Or philosophers? But after they discovered chemosynthesis and they postulated that, well, these things that live down there on their own food supply, under all that pressure and cold and dark, you don't have to go outside of our solar system to find stuff like that. They don't need the sun. So they went back out on the night sky and they said, well, so much for the Goldilocks theory. There's a lot out there. And we discovered that by doing this with Alvin. We just went straight down and imagine the Gulf of Mexico or the Pacific Ocean is Greater San Diego. And then we found an earth-changing, a theology-changing, a philosophy-changing scientific discovery just looking at this little spot on this floor in this room when we have all of this other ocean to explore. And we're not doing it. What are we doing? We're closing our eyes, we're digging down there, we're grabbing a bunch of stuff, tube worm, coral, this and that. Oh, there's a shrimp. I can get $12.99 a pound for that in the grocery store. So we're just kind of digging the commodities out, right? And not knowing at all what else we're digging up or finding down there. So that is how Alvin changed me, how it changed my perception of not only the planet and extraterrestrial life, but really seeing just that tiny patch of ocean and seeing so much life and texture and knowing that we're just dragging, bottom trawling it and otherwise mining it without even knowing the value of the ecosystems and the other life there. There's so much, even if you look at it from a purely selfish point of view, you're destroying potential medicines and biofuels and all kinds of stuff just by this giant backhoe approach to fishing or resource gathering. So I just wanted to share that sort of Alvin moment with you because it really touched me. We have I'm going over. Okay. Let me talk about communication. It's kind of hard to read. So I just wanted to devote a couple minutes to my observations of communication, on communication. So there's, the main audiences are the public, the politicians. It's kind of hard to read. resolution's kind of bad. So the way we talk to the public, the way we talk to politicians, the way we talk to the media. I've been talking to a lot of folks here who just wonder, ask me if I have any insights on that. And I think talking to the public is it's all about, you've heard this before. You heard this with Sean's. You saw this. I think it was a Rudyard Kipling quote in Sean's lecture yesterday. Those of you that were here, that hanging these scientific facts or these lessons on stories and characters. And I know I had lunch with a bunch of folks yesterday, a bunch of students, PhD candidates who were big into the outreach and big into creating visuals and cartoons and so forth. And my advice to them was that you really need to be able to connect with your audience at a human level. So you wonder why does Anderson Cooper read us the news when we can just listen to it? I mean, why do we have to look at a talking head, right? It's all about a human connection, right? You look at him and you think, I trust him, and that's part of the package. Even though what he's delivering, you don't need a face, right? You don't need a person telling us that. And it's true with almost everything, that the information we convey, we think, especially scientists, because we think, okay, so information is information, right? And we can take that, and we take that as scientists all the time, and we can expand on that and extrapolate and so forth. Information is valuable to us. We can work just fine with just information, but most people prefer that information packaged with a person. And so when you deliver information, that's why live lectures are still so important, in my opinion. But if you take that lesson and you apply it to broader outreach, it's all about putting a human behind that. So, if you're a shark scientist and you want to talk to the public about sharks, you don't just talk about sharks. You talk about maybe your personal experience in getting into that field. You talk about that particular experiment. You talk about how sharks frighten the hell out of you when you get in the water with them. And then your audience will say, I can relate to that. I'm not going to change the channel. I'm going to watch this person because it's a story I want to follow. So my advice to outreach and to people who want to outreach in general is that you would connect a human to it. And the story, you don't have to become storytellers as in, making up these stories. Sally, Dick, and Jane were, 3 organic molecules and they went walking through the forest. You don't have to do that. You don't have to get in front of a video and play a character. Just play yourselves and just, be honest. And I think you'll find that you can really engage a lot of people that way. The trick to politicians is, talking to politicians, in my opinion, is it's the same as talking to the public, you just use smaller words. They don't care. I mean, they care about votes. So my experience, I have gone to Capitol Hill and I've talked to that crowd. And they just, all they want to know is, how are the people feeling and how are they voting? Do they care? So if you talk to the public, you will eventually affect the politicians. And I just want to convey one lesson I had about talking to the media that I think is important. And then I'll open it up, although I've used up all your hour, I'm sorry. When I was in Alvin, I wanted to get this expedition into the media. So I basically dreamed up a publicity stunt, for lack of a better word. Because I heard that you could make live phone calls from the bottom of the ocean in Alvin. You couldn't do live video. I really wanted live video, but you couldn't do live video off of Alvin and Atlantis. But you could actually, believe it or not, do phone calls. So I thought, okay, I am going to call my 10-year-old son's science class. And that got me in the Washington Post. That got me a full-page write-up in the Washington Post. And what they were writing about was not me, and it was not Alvin, and it was not deep-sea exploration. What they wanted to write about was those kids hearing Dad's voice in science class from the bottom of the sea. That was the story. So the media doesn't care that much about science, just straight science. That's an unfair generalization. But what they're really looking for is a human interest story. And I know it sounds cliche, but they really want to tell that human story. And you can hang a lot of science on those human stories. Because in that article, I talked about how much life was on the bottom and where we were. 90% of the article was about Alvin and deep sea exploration, but that little bit that was the third graders listening to me was the hook that got the Washington Post to do the full page on it. So that's my advice to you, those of you who I think want to break through into the media, is that you got to give them a human interest angle to write about, and then they will be much more receptive to it. I've talked way too much. I will maybe it's 3:30, right? So it's kind of technically in, but maybe we can have some questions and answers, or questions anyway. I'll try to answer it. Yes.
Thank you for your deep presentation. And I imagine now you've picked up so much momentum that fans are actually sending you ideas for gags, kind of like they mail into the Tonight Show. So the question is, how often do you do that? And does it make your work easier or harder? And then where do you want to take this, your work, in the next 5 years?
It's a lot of questions. It generally makes it harder, the idea submissions. With that said, sometimes I'll get, the marine biologists I love, I have a lot of them on email, so I'm not just saying this because I'm in front of a bunch of them, but I get a lot of crazy ideas from them that I really love. And the general public, generally I don't get many valuable ideas just over the transom, so to speak. So, but I do love, the fact that you know so much about the ocean, but you can just pluck these little gems here and there. That isopod thing, for example, was a suggestion that somebody sent my way. I love that. Or, did you know that, sea cucumbers will vomit their guts when they panic? It's like, wow, there's a cartoon there somewhere. Right? So I'm moving my family to the ocean in 6 months. So we're going to be living on a boat just cruising around for a year. So that's where I'm taking my strip. My strip is going to follow the boat. We're going to go various places and just kind of do diving, ocean exploration. So I'm going to try to do live blogs and all that, but the comic strip will be somewhat autobiographical. Why am I having a hard time with words today? So that's where I'm taking the strip for the next year. The next 5, I don't know. I'm doing a lot more video work. I find it, newspapers are, I pick 2 things that I kind of modeled my career around, which was oceans and newspapers, and they're both dying. So, sorry, that was a. So newspapers are. The video work is my way of getting sort of. I'm too young to retire, too old to go to grad school, so I'm trying to do more video work. And that's been a lot of fun in the animation. Do we have time for one more question, or should we end it?
Take a question.
Okay.
From the beginning, did you always draw on a computer? Never with pen?
Oh, good question. No, I changed around year 2002. I was, when I drew on paper, it's typical, deadline thing. Every Friday I'd have to post, and, my deadline was 5 o'clock Friday to get it to FedEx to send it to New York. So getting that Wacom tablet bought me another 6 hours, so I could, just hit the button and send it. And being paperless is really great. I mean, you can, it's like a word processor when you write. You can just undo it. And as a matter of fact, when I do real pen and ink now, and I make a mistake, I instinctively go to the undo button and it's just one undo. So paperless is wonderful. Even my bathroom is paperless if you visit. Bring your own. So. Yes, in the back.
SpongeBob
SpongeBob SquarePants?
Yeah. What is your
maybe off the record opinion of how he even imparts like knowledge of the oceans and stuff? 'Cause that's a big platform.
Absolutely, no, I'm jealous as all heck of SpongeBob. I think his creator's got a marine biology background, doesn't he? Does anybody know? Oh, he does. So, you know that oftentimes you can have something with a lot of fluff or entertainment value and a little bit of seriousness or lesson or whatever, or you could have something with a lot of lesson and a little bit of entertainment value, and usually have a much smaller audience. So there's this, big entertainment value, little lesson, big audience typically, a lot of lesson, little entertainment, smaller audience. And so if you turn that into a math equation, the eyeballs converted sort of equation, you get different numbers. And you can do it with lots of entertainment, lots of eyeballs, and small lesson. Or you can do it the other way. But I think he's an example of lots of eyeballs. So nothing but praise for SpongeBob.
Also, if you put yourself in the cartoons, it's so cool that you'd be floating around. It's kind of interesting.
This is a conversation between me and my wife. I mean, this is very, very autobiographical. Absolutely. No. Nothing like real life experience to, if you're stuck for an idea. It's just. Any other questions?
Yeah. Are you friends with Gary Larson? The last person I can think of who was even remotely like you was Gary Larson. He got inspiration from animals.
Right.
Or animals. Do you get any inspiration from him?
Yeah. So Farside was a non-recurring event. So cartoons, they go back to about the 1890s, and they started off as more adventure strips, and then they kind of evolved. Peanuts was a big, set the paradigm for comic strips in really the second half of the 20th century. This four-panel gag, 1 week long story arc thing. Then Farside came along, and it's just totally out of the box, right? So he kind of broke down the door for a lot of other cartoonists, just, getting inspiration from anywhere. And it can be bacteria or dinosaurs or, just, large scale, big scale, aliens, whatever. So he's a genius. I wish he was still drawing. So I haven't met him. He's somewhat reclusive. I met a few other cartoonists. We do have this event every year called the Reuben Award. I usually don't show up, but it's kind of like the Oscars, except nobody cares. So I do know a few cartoonists that way. And speaking of, go ahead, sorry. Well, I was going to say nobody's asked about Charlie Hebdo yet. I'll just say something quick about it that hasn't been said before. I think we probably heard a lot from Aaron Burnett and Anderson Cooper and all the talking heads about just every aspect of this. But as a cartoonist, to try to provide maybe a different angle, I did a lot of work in Europe, and I did cartoons that were specifically for European publications. And I just, when I saw that go down, I just said, that's so typical of European cartoonists, because they, we have this First Amendment here in the United States, but cartooning, in my opinion, journalism in general is really kind of hung on these big assets, these newspapers, these TV stations, and so forth. And so they don't take the risks, whether it's justified or not. They don't take the risks that those European cartoonists have been taking. They have a much more eclectic stylistic range. Some of them aren't funny at all, not intended to be funny. So it's much more of an art form, sometimes a serious art form, and they hit hard. They hit a lot harder than American cartoonists, political cartoonists. So when I saw the Charlie Hebdo thing go down, I just didn't surprise me. And the fact that they turned right around and did another cover didn't surprise me. They do things differently over there. So that's my observation as a cartoonist that maybe you haven't heard that kind of angle on it. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about being involved in animation.
Sure.
So I was just wondering if you had explored maybe doing web animation or
Sure.
Something like that would.
Maybe we have time just for a quickie example. So I do a lot of work with nonprofits. I'm doing a series now with the United Nations on ocean, basically some ocean conservation issues. This is a 2-minute video. Maybe I'll just play it. What the heck? So this is me. This is basically me putting a camera on a tripod, hitting the on button, and jumping in front. So I'm kind of a one-man band. The animation I do with just Photoshop. The video editing I do with just consumer. I do it with either Premiere or Final Cut. So it's all really commonly available software. 10 years ago, this took $1 million. This took a big studio. This took animators. This took, and the distribution side, forget that. I mean, you had to convince Discovery Channel or whoever. But now it's all so easy, and I think it's worth showing what you can do with just a little.
You ever wonder where trash ends up? We put it in a trash can, but where does it go after that? A landfill, a recycling center maybe? But not all trash makes it into a trash can. A lot of it ends up in the ocean. Some of it's dumped directly in the ocean by ships, sometimes illegally. But most of it actually starts its journey on land, sometimes far inland, from sewers to streams, rivers, and once it hits an ocean, it keeps going. If it hits the Pacific Ocean, it might end up in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a colossal whirlpool of sorts where trash from all over congregates. Or it can end up on some remote island. Try to find a beach where nobody's been before. Chances are trash is beating you there. By far the biggest category of trash is plastic. Plastic is lightweight and indestructible. Two qualities that make it the perfect container. But once it's used, plastic becomes a lightweight, indestructible problem. Cigarette filters are also a common source of marine litter. You may not think they amount to much, but cigarette filters are one of the most common items found in beach cleanups. Marine litter also kills animals. Seabirds are programmed to eat small things that are bright and colorful and feed them to their chicks. Sea turtles can't tell the difference between their favorite snack, jellyfish, and plastic bags. And fishing gear, such as nets and lines, continues to catch and kill long after it's been lost or thrown away. Invasive or alien species have been known to catch a free ride on floating litter, and this can wreak havoc on native wildlife. There are ways we can help. Dispose of waste properly, recycle more, and switch to reusable containers where possible. And participate in beach cleanups. Industry can do a better job designing products that use less material and don't just get used once. And the next time you're given the choice between paper or plastic, say neither. We can all help solve the trash problem by making less of it.
A number of those can actually be accessed on the CMBC website.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thank you. Yes.
So I know that you were talking about, in terms of communication, that the key element seems to be making it relatable to human scale. I actually saw it as maybe it's about familiarity, or that you can make human as a subset of familiar. Because even in your comic strip, you're playing with the familiar and unfamiliar line.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you think about, right, the familiar bits of experience, that conversation between Sherman and his wife, right? That's
Yep.
something that I'm sure many people have had with their significant others. Right? And when you make choices like that, or if you're how aware you are of making those types of choices.
Sure. Great point. So I have this theory, and I haven't read it anywhere. I think that laughter really is an act of recognition. You see something that reminds you of yourself, usually, and if it's kind of an extreme situation, then it becomes funny. And I'll give you tons of examples, like going all the way back to Charlie Chaplin. His trying to court a woman is something that was funny to the viewer who's been in that situation, or you know, Buster Keaton trying to, you know, catch a fish or whatever, and you go through history and you see these comedy teams, you know, the Desi and Lucy or Abbott Costello or whatever. They are us. You look at that and you see yourself and you laugh. So the recognition part is really important, and it's important to have a character that you can that allows the viewer to relate a little bit or a lot. I can relate to, you know, might be a character like Goldilocks. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to look like me. It doesn't have to be a man. It doesn't have to be, you know, my characteristics. I can jump into any character. But there's got to be certain character traits that make you want to do that, and it's that recognition part, that ability to make that character live in your world, so that you bring certain familiar elements to a story. And then you allow them to, then you take that story to an unknown place. And you see it all the time, whether it's, you know, everything from Star Wars back to, you know, classic literature. It's something where you put together a familiar cast in a familiar place and you take them to new places. So the familiarity is what you really hang a story on, I think. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
It's in the cartoony style, but in that particular strip, the humor comes from the fact that it's not always obvious where he would shape.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So maybe using that strip, you know, talk about when do you want to emphasize that familiarity versus familiarity.
Sure. I think I think I guess the unfamiliar or the bizarreness of so many of these characters and the sea life and so forth that creates these unfamiliar moments is a big vehicle for humor for me. So if you don't bring that sort of familiar part to it, like, you know, sometimes we do have trouble figuring out how to greet somebody, I don't know, for one reason or another. So I try to put them in that situation so that they can relate to that, and hopefully that's a humorous moment. So I'm kind of stumbling my way around trying to answer that, but familiarity is important. I think it's a key to humor, is being able to, if you recognize something, then you find it funny, usually. Anybody else? One more?
What was it like for you to transition between being an engineer full-time and then going into something different from that?
Right. I really wasn't very good at engineering, so for me, I was just naturally selected out of the industry. I don't know. I just wanted to go a different way. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's just, I just felt like cartooning was it was like filmmaking, except you didn't have any budget. You could go anywhere. You could go to Europa. You could, you know, the moon of Jupiter. You could, you know, become bacteria or go back in time to dinosaurs or whatever. You were limited just by the physicality of the comic strip, but nothing else. So for me, it was a wonderful medium. I think I'm getting the hook here.